smoke drifted through the hallway long before I stepped out of my room. It curled under my door like a warning, a thin gray thread sliding into my lungs before I even knew it was there. My chest tightened instantly. That sharp, familiar burn spread across my ribs, the one that always told me I had only minutes before the coughing began. I pressed a hand to the doorframe to steady myself, swallowing against the rasp building in my throat. I could already hear Claire's laughter downstairs, light, careless, the sound of someone living in a world where breathing was effortless. Matt was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter like it was his throne, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. Smoke rolled off him in warm, arrogant waves. He didn't even glance at me at first, even as I tried to suck in air that my lungs refused to take. My vision pulsed at the edges. I knew I only had seconds to speak before my voice was swallowed by coughing. "Matt, could you please not smoke inside today?" I managed my voice thin. "My lungs. I'm having trouble." He turned slowly like I'd interrupted something important. His eyes narrowed, scanning me the way someone inspects a stain they wish they could scrub off. Claire leaned against the fridge, arms crossed, smirk playing on her lips. "You don't get to tell me what to do in my house," Matt said softly, dangerously. I opened my mouth to apologize, but the apology never made it out. A burst of movement, fast, hot, brutal, cracked across my face. My head snapped sideways. Pain flooded my cheekbone in a white-hot wave. For a moment I didn't know where the floor was, where my feet were, where the air had gone. Claire didn't gasp. She didn't step forward. She didn't even blink. She smirked wider. My knees buckled and my lungs seized. I clawed for breath as the room blurred, my ears ringing. Somewhere in the distance I thought I heard a door slam, or maybe sirens. Or maybe that was just my heartbeat, wild and panicked. I pressed a shaking hand to my cheek and felt the warmth spreading beneath my skin, the bruise already forming. That slap didn't just split my lip. It cracked open something I didn't know I still had left, my breaking point. When I finally managed to inhale, the air felt broken inside me. Each breath scraped like sand. The kitchen lights shimmered in and out like the room was too bright or too far away. Claire stepped closer, tilting her head the way you might study a painting you didn't quite understand. "You always were dramatic," she murmured. Matt blew out another cloud of smoke. It drifted lazily toward my face. "Learn your place," he said. After a moment, I don't remember standing up, but I found myself gripping the back of a chair, dizzy, fighting not to collapse again. I heard the faint chirp of a police radio from outside. Someone in the neighborhood must have heard the shouting. Claire's eyebrows lifted in mild annoyance. "You'd better tell them nothing happened," she said. "Don't make things worse for yourself." My cheek throbbed with every heartbeat. My lungs worked like broken machinery. I remember thinking, if I stay here they will kill me without ever raising their voices again. 2 officers knocked a moment later, stepping into a kitchen full of smoke and tension. Claire greeted them with practiced innocence, her tone sweet and polished. She placed a hand gently against my back and said, "She just gets overwhelmed." She didn't mean to alarm anyone. I could barely speak. I tried to explain the slap, the smoke, the fear tightening around my lungs like rope, but my voice cracked, and the cough hit me hard, doubling me over. The officers exchanged concerned looks, but saw no visible injury, no immediate threat they could act on. They asked a few questions. Claire answered for me every time. Eventually they sighed, wrote a brief note, issued a vague warning about keeping the peace, and left. The door closed behind them. Silence slithered into the room like a final insult, and then Claire laughed softly under her breath. By the time I slipped back to my room, my legs trembled with every step. I shut the door and leaned against it, letting a cough tear through my chest, loud, violent, full of a wet rattle that scared even me. My cheek was swollen now, glowing with heat. When I touched, the skin pain flared all the way into my jaw. I sank onto the bed, staring at the peeling corner of paint near the window. The air in my room tasted stale, tinged with smoke that had seeped into the vents days or weeks ago. I tugged my blanket around my shoulders, shivering. I tried to breathe deeply, but the inhale dissolved into a cough that sent sparks through my lungs. I couldn't stop replaying the moment the cigarette smoke drifting toward me, the slap, the way Claire's smile curled in satisfaction. I searched my mind for excuses, explanations, anything that could make what happened feel less monstrous. But there was none. What happened was simple. My sister watched her husband hit me, and she enjoyed it. Morning came with no apology, no concern. Just Claire standing in my doorway holding a sheet of paper like it was a court summons. Here, she said, "New house rules." Her voice was flat, as if last night had been nothing more than a mild inconvenience. I blinked at her, still sitting on my bed, holding my aching cheek. "You can't keep disrupting the flow of the household," she said. "We all need to coexist peacefully. That means you follow the rules." I forced myself upright, feeling dizziness spin around me. "What rules?" I asked quietly. Claire stepped inside and handed me the paper. No cooking after 7, no opening windows, no adjusting the thermostat, no using the main bathroom, no guests, no late-night walking around. Daily contribution fee, $350. I stared at the list, each item tightening around me like a chain. "I can't afford this," I whispered. "You'll have to figure it out," Claire said with a shrug. "We're not running a charity." My throat tightened as I tried to breathe. The room felt colder, or maybe that was just fear settling into my bones. Later that morning, I walked downstairs to heat tea for my lungs. The house was quiet in the wrong way, heavy, expectant. When I opened the cabinet, I found my inhaler shoved to the back shelf behind a stack of heavy pans. I knew I hadn't put it there. Matt walked in as I struggled to reach it. "You're moving things around again," he said lazily. "Try not to lose your stuff." He lit another cigarette. The smoke rose between us like a wall. I backed out of the kitchen without speaking. My lungs burned for the rest of the day. In the afternoon, I stepped outside to throw away a small bag of trash, a chore Claire assigned me, despite knowing the cold air triggered my symptoms. The sunlight felt too bright, the ground too far, my breath too fragile. And then I saw Marjorie, the neighbor, tending to her yard. She looked up sharply when she spotted me. Her gaze went straight to the fading bruise on my cheek. "Dear, are you all right?" she asked quietly. I startled, shaking my head automatically. "I'm fine. Just adjusting." She looked unconvinced. Her eyes held something like concern and something like recognition. "I hear things," she said softly. "Walls are thin around here." A shiver crawled up my spine. She lowered her voice. "If something feels wrong, it probably is." I nodded once, unable to speak. She didn't push further. She just offered a small, knowing smile and went back to pruning her flowers. Inside the house, silence pressed in again. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling the weight of the air shift with every step. My breathing grew uneven. The hallway felt colder than the rest of the house. The vent hummed softly, blowing air tinged with that faint bitter smell, smoke, and something chemical I couldn't name. I stood in front of my bedroom door, hand trembling on the knob. This house wasn't shelter. It wasn't a home. It was becoming something else entirely, something that fed on my weakness, something that grew stronger every time I coughed or cried. I closed my eyes, inhaled as deeply as my lungs allowed, and stepped inside. Nothing would ever be the same after last night. I think that was the moment I stopped hoping things would get better, and started realizing I had to find a way out. The morning after the slap felt heavier than my lungs had ever been. I woke with a pounding in my cheekbone and a wheeze deep in my chest, the kind that meant the day would be a battle from the first breath. My room was dim, pale sunlight filtering through a thin curtain Claire had insisted on, because heavy drapes collect dust, and you already cough enough. The air smelled faintly of last night's smoke, as if the walls themselves had absorbed it. I sat up, slowly wincing at the pull of bruised muscles. For a moment I allowed myself to imagine the day would begin gently, that maybe Claire would knock softly, apologize for Matt's behavior, offer a warm breakfast, and pretend she still cared about me. That fantasy lasted only until the real knock came, sharp, impatient, clipped. Claire didn't wait for me to answer. She pushed the door open with her elbow, eyes narrowed, expression stiff. You're awake. Good, she said. We need to get some things straight. She held out a sheet of paper. I blinked at it, still disoriented. It trembled in her hand, not from nerves but from annoyance, as though my slower breathing inconvenienced her. What is this? I asked. Household responsibilities, she said. Rules, expectations. My heart thudded. I hadn't even left the bed and already my chest felt tight. I took the paper. Her voice dropped lower. And Anna, don't bring up last night again. Matt was stressed. You provoked him. Let's move on. She walked away before I could form a reply. I stared at the list. No using the kitchen after 7. No adjusting the thermostat. No opening windows. No shower longer than 5 minutes. No television without headphones. No leaving the house without permission. Contribution fee $350 due Friday. The letters blurred as my lungs tightened. My disability check barely covered medication, and she knew it. Claire was not confused. She was in control. I pressed a hand to my cheek where Matt's slap still pulsed like a second heartbeat. I tried to swallow my fear and breathe evenly, but the more I read, the more suffocating the words became. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. I wrapped myself in a sweater and stepped into the hallway. The house was silent, too silent, like it was waiting for me to make a mistake. When I went downstairs, the cold hit me first. Claire had lowered the thermostat so much that the hardwood floor felt like ice beneath my feet. My joints ached instantly. Matt's voice drifted from the living room. She's going to run up bills again, he muttered. Claire replied in a hushed tone, Good. She needs to understand she can't freeload. I swallowed and moved as quietly as I could. Every step felt like trespassing. When I reached the kitchen, I noticed my inhaler missing from the counter where I'd left it. After searching all the cabinets, I finally found it shoved behind a stack of pans I couldn't reach without climbing onto a chair. I stood on my toes, stretching my fingers toward the plastic tube. Matt entered just then. Digging for treasure, he asked, smirking. I needed my inhaler, I whispered. You should keep track of it then, he said. This house isn't your personal storage. He lit a cigarette without breaking eye contact and exhaled slowly. The smoke drifted over his shoulder toward me. I stepped back, tapping my chest lightly. He watched my struggle with an almost curious expression before turning away, leaving the cigarette burning in the ashtray. I made tea weak the way Claire insisted and retreated upstairs. I sipped it slowly, letting the warm steam soothe my throat. But the peace lasted only minutes. When I headed back down to wash the mug, a new object caught my eye. A small round camera mounted on the hallway wall pointed directly at the staircase, and more importantly, my bedroom door. I froze. Claire's voice floated behind me. Isn't it great? Now we have proof of everything that happens in this hallway. No one can accuse us of anything. My skin prickled. I didn't accuse. That's not the point, Claire said, brushing past me. This is for everyone's safety. But the lens stared at me like an unblinking eye. It wasn't there to protect me. It was there to monitor me. I returned to my room with a knot forming in my stomach. I needed fresh air, but when I opened the window, Claire appeared instantly as if summoned. What are you doing? She demanded. I just needed some fresh air, I said. It's February, she snapped. You're wasting heat. Shut it. I hesitated, and she reached past me and slammed the window. The gust of movement stirred dust into the air, making me cough. You need to be more considerate, she said coldly. Matt and I work hard to maintain this house. Don't make us regret our generosity. Generosity. The word felt poisonous. That afternoon, Claire handed me a white envelope with my name on it. Inside was the invoice for the household fee. $350, due in 4 days. I stared at her, stunned. Claire, I don't have that kind of money. She smiled tightly. Then you'll need to figure something out. We're not paying for your electricity and food on top of everything else. It's not fair, I whispered, hating myself for how weak my voice sounded. Life isn't fair, Anna, she said, shrugging. You of all people should know that. Later, while taking out the trash, another new chore, I saw Marjorie again. Her eyes landed immediately on the bruise. "Is that from a fall?" she asked. I shook my head before I could stop myself. "No, it's nothing." Her expression softened with concern. She lowered her voice. "Walls are thin," she said again, "and I've heard things." My breathing hitched. She continued before I could answer. "If you ever need help, just knock, or leave a note in my mailbox. You're not as alone as you think." I nodded, blinking rapidly to keep tears back. When I stepped back into the house, the warmth of Marjorie's words clung to me until the cold air swallowed it. The moment I climbed the stairs, I felt the pressure of eyes on me. The camera's red light blinked steadily, tracking my movements. I noticed something new. The vent above it puffed out a faint smoky draft, even though no one was smoking. The smell seeped into my room like a whisper. A threat. A reminder. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it. My breathing grew shallow as I stared at the list of house rules pinned to my wall. My fingers shook. Not from cold this time, but from anger rising like heat under my skin. I picked up the paper, tracing each line. No window, no thermostat, no movement after 7, no voice, no air, no dignity. My lungs tightened again this time, not from smoke or cold, but from the realization sinking into my bones. They weren't trying to help me, they weren't trying to support me, they were trying to control me. Every rule tightened their grip, every violated boundary dimmed my existence. Every breath I took felt like permission I had to earn. That night, I lay awake listening to the house groan in the dark. Pipes shifted, vents hummed, the camera clicked faintly as it adjusted its lens. Every sound reminded me this place didn't want me here. Or worse, it wanted me here for the wrong reasons. My lungs wheezed as I pulled my blanket tighter and stared at the ceiling. The bruise on my cheek throbbed softly, echoing the reminder of Matt's hand and Claire's smirk. I whispered into the darkness more to myself than anyone else. I have to find a way out, before this house swallows me whole. The words drifted into the cold air and dissolved, but the resolve behind them stayed. For the first time since moving in, the fear did not smother me. It shaped something else, a small sharp ember of defiance, and underneath that ember, the first fragile breath of a plan. The next few days slid by in a blur of cold air, stale smoke, and rules that grew heavier each time Claire printed a new version of them. I woke every morning with a pounding behind my eyes and a tightness in my chest that didn't loosen until midday, if it loosened at all. My inhaler sat like a lifeline on my nightstand, but even it felt weaker now, as if each puff had to fight harder to keep me upright. One morning I reached for my sweater to guard against the cold seeping into the upstairs hallway. The thermostat read 58 degrees again. Claire insisted it was a necessary cutback to manage bills, but the rest of the house stayed warm. Only my room sat barely heated. The cold settled into my bones like a punishment meant to look like frugality. I opened the door, slowly pausing, when I noticed the faint smell of cigarette smoke drifting through the hallway vent. It wasn't strong, just enough to sting the back of my throat. Matt wasn't awake yet. Claire's feet never touched the floor before 8. So who had been smoking near the upstairs vent at dawn? My lungs tightened as I stepped into the hall. The camera blinked its little red light at me, watching, recording, measuring the seconds it took me to walk down the stairs. I kept my eyes forward, moving carefully, pretending not to notice the hum of the vent or the prickling fear gathering under my skin. The kitchen was empty except for the remains of last night's smoke hanging low, trapped by the closed windows Claire refused to open. When I reached for a glass to pour some water, I found the cabinet rearranged again. My inhaler wasn't in the spot I'd put it. My tea was pushed to the back. Everything felt touched, moved, sifted through. Claire watched me from the doorway, arms crossed, hair perfectly smoothed into a ponytail that made her look younger, calmer, less like the woman who wrote house rules prohibiting me from breathing the wrong way. "You need to stop losing your things," she said. I looked at the cabinet again, then back at her. I didn't lose anything. Someone moved it. "Are you accusing me?" Her eyebrow arched like a warning. "No, I just—" "Good," she snapped. Because I don't have time to track your stuff. I forced myself to inhale slowly through my mouth and released it through my nose. Each breath felt like dragging cold air across broken glass. Later that afternoon, Claire handed me a spray bottle and a rag. Her tone was sweet in a way that prickled my skin. Clean the kitchen. And don't use too much soap. You always overdo it. I nodded, taking the bottle moving slowly, because bending too fast made me lightheaded. As I wiped the counters, I heard Claire laugh softly at her phone, her voice drifting toward me like smoke through a cracked window. Every few minutes she peeked in, monitoring my progress like I was a teenager on chore duty. Halfway through wiping the lower cabinets, I reached up for the rag and saw that the vent above the kitchen door was pushing out a haze that shimmered gently in the light. Not thick enough to set off alarms, but enough to sting my nose. The coughing began before I could stand. Sharp, deep, the kind that made my ribs ache. I pressed my fist to my chest, struggling to steady myself. Claire rolled her eyes. "Anna, you're scaring the dog," she said. "They didn't even have a dog." I excused myself and climbed the stairs slowly. Each step felt like wading against a tide of heavy air. When I reached my room, I pressed the door shut behind me and leaned back against it, sliding down to sit on the floor. My breaths came short and uneven. I grabbed my inhaler, thankfully still on the nightstand, and took 2 puffs. The medicine opened my lungs just enough to quiet the panic without stopping the fear. Once my breath steadied, I lifted my head and saw something I hadn't noticed before: a slight discoloration around the vent in my room. Yellowish gray, smoke residue. I crawled to it and brushed my fingertip along the inside edge of the cover. My finger came away smudged with ash. A cold shiver ran through me. Smoke had been blown directly into my room. Deliberately. Someone had exhaled or burned something right at the vent intake. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt too tight. That evening, when Claire left her wine glass on the living room table and went upstairs, I took a moment to breathe in the absence of her presence. The house felt larger without her watching me. For a second, I thought about calling someone, anyone. But my contact list was full of people I hadn't spoken to in years. And shame has a way of anchoring you in silence. The silence didn't last long. Matt walked in from the garage, smelling like cold air and cigarette smoke. He glanced at me on the couch. "You're making the place smell like medicine," he said. "It's just my inhaler," I murmured. "Well, it's strong. Maybe use it outside." My jaw slackened. "It's freezing outside. Then don't use it so much." He flicked on the TV and turned the volume up until my chest vibrated with every explosion in whatever show he was watching. I pressed a hand over my sternum, trying to steady the tightness, and concentrated on breathing through the noise. The next day was worse. The cold hit harder. My chest hurt before I even got out of bed. The vent hissed softly above me, dispersing air that tasted faintly metallic. When I stepped into the hallway, the camera blinked again, recording each breath I took. I made it downstairs, searching for tea, something warm to soothe the ache beneath my ribs. Claire sat at the table, flipping through a stack of papers, bills, receipts, and something else. "What's that?" I asked. She smiled without warmth. "Just tracking costs." "For what for you?" she said. "Food, utilities, everything you use?" "I want to be fair." I blinked. "I already pay the household fee. You pay a portion," she corrected. "Not enough for all the extra burden." Extra burden. The words hit harder than Matt's slap. I looked at the stack again. She was listing everything down to the number of tea bags missing from the box. I couldn't breathe for a moment. "You're charging me for food I don't eat," I said quietly. "You don't eat much, but you still breathe." "That costs money," she replied, flipping another page. My vision blurred, and for a second I thought I might faint. I gripped the edge of the table, steadying myself. Claire glanced up, annoyed. "Can you not do that?" "You look like you're about to drop dead, and that's not my responsibility." I left the room without answering. Outside, I found Marjorie trimming her shrubs. She straightened when she saw me and frowned. "You're pale as a ghost," she said. "Are you taking your treatments?" I nodded weakly. "It's just difficult here. She watched me, really watched me the way people do when they're trying to fit together pieces of a puzzle you're too tired to explain. "Anna," she said softly, stepping closer, "if something's wrong, you can tell me." My throat closed. Every instinct screamed to say nothing to protect Claire, to avoid escalating what was already unbearable. But Marjorie's eyes didn't judge. They held something like worry, something like truth. "I'm trying," was all I managed to whisper. She touched my arm gently. "Trying isn't the same as safe." I carried her words with me as I walked back inside. They pulsed louder than the hum of the vent, louder than the camera clicking, louder than the fear pressing down on me. By afternoon, the cold settled deeper in my bones. My joints stiffened, my breath shortened. I asked Claire if she'd consider raising the thermostat just a little. "We can't afford it," she said. "I can give you part of my check." "You already owe us," she cut in. "Don't add to the debt." Debt. She called my existence a debt. That evening, as I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes, I reached for a towel and knocked over a glass. It shattered. The noise echoed through the house. Matt was there in seconds, looming over me. "Can't you do anything without breaking something?" he growled. I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "You never mean anything," he said. "You just cause problems." His voice lowered further, almost a whisper. "Don't make more of them. Understand?" I nodded quickly, throat tight. He stepped back and I sucked in a shaky breath. My lungs burned from how long I'd held the air in. Upstairs, the vent hissed again. I sat on the edge of my bed, fingers shaking as I touched the yellowed edge of the vent. Why was it discolored? Why wasn't the rest of the house affected? Why did the smoke always drift into my room first? The truth pressed against my ribs. Someone was blowing smoke into the system, directly into the duct that fed my room. I didn't know why. I didn't know how long. I didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time since moving into this house, I let myself consider a terrifying possibility. This wasn't just neglect. This wasn't just cruelty. This was control. A slow suffocation disguised as inconvenience. And I was running out of air. I lay back, staring at the ceiling until the lines blurred. My breath rattled softly, each inhale a reminder that time was thinning around me, just like the oxygen in this room. I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness. Something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong. And finally, the part of me that always tried to excuse everything went quiet. The cold woke me before the sun did. It curled beneath the door, slid over the hardwood floor, and settled against my skin like frost. My breath came out in a pale cloud, visible even in the dim morning light. The thermostat in the hallway still showed 58 degrees. No matter how many sweaters I layered on the cold, always found a way in seeping into my bones, tightening my lungs, making every inhale feel like swallowing winter air. I sat on the edge of my bed, hugging my arms around myself until the coughing began, soft at first, then sharp, rattling, spiking pressure behind my eyes. I braced both hands against my knees and waited for the fit to pass. It always passed eventually, but each time it took a little more out of me. When I finally stood, I felt lightheaded, the floor tilting slightly beneath me. I steadied myself against the wall and reached for the doorknob. The moment I opened the door, heat from downstairs drifted up the staircase, just enough to remind me that the rest of the house was warm. Only my room remained a refrigerated box. I descended slowly each step, making my joints ache. In the kitchen, I found the vent above the pantry humming softly. That faint scent of cigarette smoke curled from it again, not overpowering, just enough to sting the back of my throat. I pressed my lips together, forcing myself not to cough. Claire was already awake, standing by the counter in her pristine yoga pants, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up. "I thought you were still asleep," she said casually. My voice cracked. "It's too cold upstairs." "It's fine," she said without glancing at me. "It keeps the energy bill down." "For my room only." She paused for half a second, barely noticeable, before responding. "The upstairs vents are old, you know that. but I'd lived in enough places to know the difference between old and adjusted. The heat wasn't broken. It was deliberate. I poured water into a mug for tea, trying to steady my trembling hands, when Claire suddenly looked up. "You left the window unlocked yesterday. I cracked it open for air," I said. "I closed it." "You didn't lock it," she snapped. "Anyone could have broken in." "The house has a camera system. That doesn't matter," she said, cutting me off. "If you're going to be here, you need to be responsible." Her tone sliced through me sharper than the cold did. I nodded and took my tea upstairs. Claire followed. She stood in my doorway without knocking again. Her eyes scanned my room as if taking inventory. "We need to go over a few more updates," she said. "For the house rules." I clenched my jaw, trying not to flinch. "You've been using too much hot water. Your showers need to be shorter." I inhaled slowly. "They're already short." "Then make them shorter." She stepped further into the room and picked up my medication bottles' reading labels like she had authority over them. "And this nebulizer is loud. You should do treatments when Matt and I aren't home." "My breathing." "Nobody is saying you can't breathe," she said, voice flat. "Just be considerate." She placed the bottles back without aligning them the way they were before she touched them. The disordered row made the room feel tilted. When she finally walked away, I sat on the bed and pressed both hands against my face until the urge to scream dissolved into a quiet exhale. I tried to distract myself by cleaning. Cleaning made me feel useful, needed, maybe even welcome. But when I finished making the bed and turned toward the door, Claire stood there again. I didn't hear her approach. "You fold your sheets wrong," she said. I froze. "I've been making beds for decades, Claire." She smiled thinly. "Not like this." She walked away, leaving me with the sheets half smoothed, half crumpled, and a feeling inside my chest like my ribs were tightening around my lungs. By late morning, the cold in my room felt sharper than before. I touched the vent above my pillow. It was blowing more aggressively today. The draft carried that same faint bitterness, the residue of someone else's habit drifting through the metal lungs of the house. A shiver ran down my spine. As I stepped outside to retrieve the mail later, I spotted Marjorie from next door. She was watering a row of frost-resistant shrubs, her breath forming small white clouds. When she looked up and saw me, her expression shifted instantly. "You look worse," she said softly. "Is everything all right?" I tried to smile. "Just cold and tired." "You've been coughing more," she observed. "Even last night, I heard it through my window. I opened my mouth to apologize, but she waved a hand. No need for that. I just want to make sure you're okay." The kindness in her voice made something inside me tremble. "I'm managing," I said. She stepped closer. "If you ever need anything at all, just knock. Or leave a note if she's watching." My throat tightened. "Thank you." Marjorie held my gaze for a long moment before lowering her voice. "Your sister doesn't seem herself lately." I didn't trust my voice enough to respond, so I nodded instead. She squeezed my arm gently before returning to her shrubs. When I re-entered the house, warmth hit me immediately, thick, heavy, concentrated downstairs, nowhere upstairs. I climbed the staircase slowly, aware of the camera following my movement. I could almost feel its gaze pricking the back of my neck. Cold air poured from the vent outside my door. My room felt like a tomb waiting to be sealed. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Claire: "Do not go outside without telling me first. We have routines here. Don't disrupt them." Routines. As if my existence was a disruption to the rhythm of their lives. My chest tightened again, not from COPD this time, but from anger tightening like a fist around my lungs. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling cracks I hadn't noticed before. Thin lines spreading outward, almost delicate. They looked like fractures, hairline breaks, forming long before the structure gives way. That evening, Claire cooked pasta. The smell drifted through the house, warm and inviting, reminding me of childhood nights when she'd beg me to stir the pot for her because she didn't want to burn her hands. Memories felt dangerous now. They made me hesitate. They made me hope. and hope made me vulnerable. Matt came home smelling of cold air and cigarette smoke. He brushed past me in the hallway without acknowledgement. When he reached the kitchen, he kissed Claire's cheek and murmured something that made her laugh. Her laugh clanged in my ears like a door slamming shut. Later, as I poured myself a tiny bowl of pasta because any more would be noted, Claire leaned against the counter. "You've been using a lot of electricity," she said. I don't think so. The heater in your room runs all night. It's freezing in there. You could use extra blankets." "I already do." She sighed dramatically as if I were a child testing her patience. "Then figure something out. We're not made of money." Matt snorted without looking up from his phone. My pulse beat loudly in my ears. The air felt thick again. I finished eating in silence and went upstairs before they could find anything else to scold me for. When I reached my room, the cold slapped me full in the face. It was colder than before. I crossed to the vent and lifted my hand to it. A strong draft blew against my fingers, but it wasn't just cold air, it held the faint, bitter tang of smoke again. My lungs seized before I could turn away. A coughing fit ripped through me, dragging me to my knees. I grabbed the nightstand for support and knocked my inhaler to the floor. My vision blurred as I reached for it. As I tried to breathe, I heard footsteps outside my door. Claire's voice drifted into the room as casual as ever. "You really need to stop overreacting to everything she said. It's exhausting," I gasped for breath, unable to answer. After a moment, her footsteps retreated. I stayed on the floor until the cough subsided, until I could breathe without tasting blood at the back of my throat. The house had grown quieter by then. Too quiet. I crawled toward the vent and touched it again. More residue smeared onto my fingertips. Someone had been manipulating the airflow. Someone had been pushing smoke through the system. My lungs heaved once more. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't neglect. This was targeted, controlled, deliberate. That night, as I lay beneath my blankets, shivering in a room cold enough to numb my fingers, something inside me shifted. I stopped asking myself why they treated me this way. Instead, I asked how far they planned to go, and how long I could survive it. When the house finally went quiet, I whispered my first unfiltered truth into the darkness. This house wants me gone. But the more terrifying thought followed right after, and they know it. I woke before dawn with the unsettling certainty that if I didn't act soon, something irreversible would happen to me in this house. My lungs were tighter than they had ever been, each inhale a negotiation, each exhale a prayer. The cold in my room felt more deliberate than accidental, like hands pressing against my chest from the inside. I sat up, slowly reaching for my notebook on the nightstand. The pages held only a few scribbles, so far dates fragments, moments I didn't want to forget even when I wished I could. Last night's smear of ash from the vent marked the most recent entry. I stared at the note until the words blurred. Outside the room I heard footsteps, slow, drawn out, careful. Someone paused right outside my door. I froze, holding my breath. A shadow moved under the doorframe, then lingered before finally fading down the hall. Whoever it was had been listening. I clutched the notebook to my chest and whispered to myself, "I can't survive this alone." The thought wasn't dramatic. It was factual. My lungs were losing the war. The house was suffocating me. Claire and Matt were squeezing tighter each day. If I didn't send a signal now, I wouldn't make it to whatever tomorrow meant to them. I grabbed my phone and pulled the blanket over my head, creating a small pocket of warmth where my breath didn't sting so sharply. I typed slowly, searching for anything that could help. Vulnerable adult rights, COPD abuse household, legal help for at-risk adults. Most of the results felt too big, too far, too theoretical. I scrolled until a small line of text caught my eye. Local legal aid hotline, free confidential assistance. My pulse quickened. I hesitated. Calling meant stepping out of the fog of denial, the one that kept telling me this was family, this was temporary, this was survivable. But the bruise on my cheek told another story. I pressed the number. A man answered on the first ring. "Legal aid. This is Daniel. My breath hitched. Hi. I'm not sure if this is the right place. His voice softened immediately. Take your time. Are you safe to talk? I looked at the door, imagining the shadow still standing there waiting. I think so, I whispered. What's your name? He asked. Anna. Anna, are you in immediate danger right now? I don't know, I said honestly. But I think something is very wrong. I told him about the smoke in the vents, the slap, the cold room, the missing inhaler, the rules, the camera, the suffocating growing dread. My voice broke twice, and each time he waited patiently. When I finished, Daniel's tone changed not to sympathy, but to a kind of steel-edged clarity. Anna, he said quietly, what you're describing is not just unhealthy, it's abusive, and parts of it are criminal. My chest tightened. I don't want to get my sister in trouble. You need to prioritize staying alive, he said firmly. What's happening to you cannot continue. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Hearing someone say the words I'd been choking on made everything too real. What do? I whispered. First, he said, you document everything. Photos, audio timestamps, receipts. Anything unusual, save it. Second, do not confront them. Let them believe nothing has changed. Third, call me if anything escalates. And lastly, he paused, letting the silence strengthen the words to come. You are not alone. I'm with you now. A soft sob escaped me. I covered my mouth, afraid someone downstairs might hear. Anna, he added, you're doing the right thing. After the call, I hid the notebook inside the lining of an old winter coat folded in the back of my closet. Then I tucked my phone under my mattress, not far enough to lose access, but far enough that Claire wouldn't find it if she barged in again. And she did. Later that morning, she entered my room without knocking again, making my shoulders tense instantly. You're up early, she observed, eyes scanning every corner like she was taking mental inventory. I couldn't sleep, I said. Well, try, she replied sharply. Matt has a big presentation today and he doesn't need distractions. And don't go outside without telling me first. I nodded because nodding was easier than breathing through another interrogation. After she left, I waited a full minute before taking out my phone and testing the audio recorder. I pressed record and whispered into it March 5th. Claire came into my room without knocking. She said I'm not allowed outside without her permission. Hearing my own voice say it felt foreign, too calm for the storm around me. But Daniel was right. Evidence mattered. And this was the first brick. The day passed slowly, every hour stretched thin by fear and cold. I kept my movements measured so they wouldn't ask questions. I cleaned the counters quietly. I folded laundry silently. Every few minutes I checked that the phone was still hidden in my pocket, recording anything useful. That afternoon, something shifted. I caught Claire looking at me strangely. Her eyes narrowed, head tilted slightly. Not curious, suspicious. She approached slowly. Why are you carrying your phone around so much? My stomach lurched. I like listening to music. You don't listen to music, she said flatly. I swallowed. I'm trying something new. She stared another second too long before walking away. The fear that surged through me was sharp and metallic like ice cutting through warm skin. But beneath it, something else flickered. Resolve. That evening, when Claire was occupied in the kitchen, I stepped out to the backyard under the pretense of checking if the trash bins needed rolling in. The icy air hit my lungs and pushed a few coughing fits forward, but I forced myself through them. I needed to speak to Marjorie. She spotted me immediately and walked over, eyes filled with concern. You look terrible, she said gently. Worse than yesterday? I'm okay, I lied. No, you're not. Her directness broke me a little. I exhaled shakily. Marjorie. Something's happening in that house, she nodded. I know, my head jerked up. You do? She looked around before lowering her voice. I hear things. The yelling, the way he talks to you. And that coughing. Good God, dear, I hear it through the walls. You sound like you're drowning. Tears pricked my eyes. I don't know what to do. Marjorie touched my arm. Start writing everything down. Everything. Don't rely on your memory when you're scared. I already am, I whispered. Good. Keep going. And Anna. Yes. If they try to make you feel crazy, remember you're not. Her words followed me back into the house like a shield of warmth I wasn't sure I deserved. Night fell thick and heavy. Claire and Matt retreated upstairs early, leaving the downstairs in a quiet gloom. I crept out of my room to check the hallway vent again. A faint haze curled out smoke so thin it might have been imagined if not for the acrid sting it sent through my nostrils. I pressed record on my phone. Footsteps approached fast. Matt appeared at the end of the hallway, filling the narrow space with his height and presence. He stared at me for a long moment, lips curving into something between irritation and amusement. Why are you always wandering around at night? He asked. I'm just getting water. You don't need to do that, he said, stepping forward until he was too close, too solid. Stay in your room. It's better for everyone. My knees trembled. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You never do, he murmured. But you always do. He tapped the camera near the staircase with 2 fingers, the gesture slow and taunting. Just remember, he said quietly, we see everything. He walked away before I could breathe properly again. I closed my door and pressed my back to it, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. My heart pounded. My lungs struggled to find a rhythm. But the phone in my pocket was still recording. His threat was captured. And for the first time since moving into this house, fear didn't shut me down. It sharpened me. I whispered into the dark, into the small pool of air that was still mine. You don't know that I'm watching you back. Outside, the vents hummed. Smoke drifted. The camera blinked. But something had changed. I had taken my first step out of silent suffering. And there was no going back. I woke with a strange kind of determination humming beneath my ribs, something that didn't come from strength, but from desperation that had finally learned how to stand. My lungs still burned from the night before. The cold still pooled in my room like a fog that refused to lift. But something inside me felt steadier. Maybe Daniel's voice lingered there. Maybe Marjorie's concern. Maybe the quiet defiance that had taken root under my skin. Evidence, Daniel had said. Evidence is survival. I sat up slowly, reaching for my phone hidden beneath the blanket. My fingers trembled as I opened the recorder app. I whispered the date and the time, then set the phone aside. Next, I took the tiny recorder Daniel had mailed me, packed discreetly in a padded envelope, addressed only to my initials, and read the instructions twice before I dared place it behind the decorative plant in the hallway. The leaves draped over it perfectly. Anyone glancing by would never know a small red light blinked beneath them. As I straightened the plant, I heard Claire humming downstairs, an eerily bright tune that made my stomach twist. She only hummed when she was satisfied or preparing to scold someone. I couldn't tell which it would be today. I crept down the stairs, slowly letting the recorder capture every footstep and every murmur. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I steadied my breathing and listened. Claire spoke quietly to herself as she wiped the counter. She's been too calm lately, she muttered. Maybe she's finally learning. My skin prickled. If only she knew what that calmness meant. I stepped into the kitchen. Claire looked up, her eyes widening a fraction, surprised I'd appeared without coughing first. She recovered quickly and offered a tight smile. You're up early again, she said. I couldn't sleep. Then rest more. She walked past me, brushing my shoulder with a deliberate coldness. Matt and I don't need you wandering the house all hours. It's unsettling. I nodded, though I knew she didn't care about my agreement. In the afternoon, with Claire busy reorganizing cabinets for no reason beyond asserting control, I slipped into the corner of the hallway near the recorder. Her voice drifted through clearly. I swear if she uses that machine again while Matt is home, he's going to lose it. She laughed. I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth to keep from making a sound. Matt returned that evening, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. I heard his heavy steps and stiff movements before he even entered the kitchen. He smelled like cold air and stale smoke. He was irritated his version of tired, which meant danger. As he passed me in the hallway, he paused. "You're using too much electricity," he said. "I haven't the machine. It runs all night." "It has to," I murmured. "Well," he said, stepping closer, "maybe you should sleep less." The recorder caught everything. After dinner, if 2 spoonfuls of pasta could be called dinner, I climbed the stairs and slipped into my room. I turned on the phone to review the hallway recording just long enough to hear Claire's earlier whisper, "If she slips up again, don't help her. Let it play out." A chill ran down my spine. Let it play out. A phrase that sounded less like frustration and more like intent. I backed up the audio onto the USB Marjorie had given me, the one disguised as a cheap souvenir keychain. I'd tucked it into the inner pocket of my coat earlier, and now I hid it even deeper, sliding it into the seam beneath the lining. If Claire searched the coat, she'd never find it. The next morning brought another discovery. As I vacuumed the upstairs hallway loudly enough that no one would wonder why I was moving slowly or touching the vent, I noticed Claire's office door slightly ajar. She normally kept it locked, but luck or carelessness had left it open by an inch. My pulse quickened. I slipped inside. Papers lay scattered across her desk, bills, sticky notes, a list titled "Projected Monthly Income," and a printed form from the state's caregiver stipend program. My name was written neatly at the top next to the classification "Vulnerable Adult High Dependency." The application date was 2 weeks before I'd moved in. A cold weight settled in my stomach. They hadn't taken me in out of kindness. They'd brought me here expecting profit. I swallowed hard and snapped a quick photo, then another. My hands shook, my breath trembled. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. I rushed out, pressing the vacuum switch just before Claire appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing?" she asked sharply. "Just cleaning," I said, keeping my face lowered so she wouldn't see how pale I had gone. She stared at me for a moment too long before walking away. I didn't move until her footsteps faded downstairs. That night when I told Marjorie I needed to talk, she met me in the shadowed corner of her yard. Her breath puffed into the cold air and she looked both worried and determined. "You're getting worse," she said. "I can hear it." "Claire and Matt," I began, then faltered. Marjorie stepped closer. "Anna, tell me." I told her about the smoke, the room, the slap, the cold, the rules, the hidden documents. Not everything, but enough. Enough to see her expression change, sympathy melting into anger. She reached into her jacket pocket and handed me a bag of grocery staples, throat lozenges, the tea she'd noticed I favored, a small box of cough drops. "You hide that," she said. "Don't let them know I gave you anything." Then she pressed a small USB case into my palm. "In case your phone breaks," she whispered. "In case they break it." My throat tightened. "Why are you helping me?" She held my gaze. "Because I've seen women disappear in homes like this. I'm not letting you be one of them." When I returned to the house, the cold felt sharper, as if the walls had overheard everything. I climbed the stairs and paused, hearing the faintest scraping sound near my door. The vent hissed and pushed out a draft that smelled different tonight. Stronger, dirtier, unmistakably contaminated with smoke. My lungs seized, instantly jerking a cough from deep inside me. I dropped to my knees. The nebulizer sat beside my bed, but when I reached for it, the water chamber was bone dry. I'd filled it that morning. Someone had emptied it. My body shook as I struggled to draw in enough air to stay conscious. I grabbed the inhaler and took 2 puffs, then 2 more. The wheezing eased only slightly. Exhaustion settled over me like a heavy blanket. When the coughing finally slowed, I stayed on the floor, too weak to stand, staring at the vent with resentment hot as fever. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't neglect. This was a pattern. And patterns could be proven. Late that night, while reviewing the day's recordings from my phone, I heard something else, something I hadn't caught earlier. Matt's voice, low and irritated. "She's getting harder to control." Then Claire's reply. "Then we need to speed things up." My skin crawled. Speed what up? What was left to speed? My heart pounded as I backed up the files onto the USB. I tucked it into my coat, then tucked the coat into a bag under my bed. If they snooped again, I needed layers of protection. Around midnight, I stepped out to get water, chest still aching. The hallway was dark except for the dim glow of the camera's red light. Then Matt appeared at the far end of the hall, silent, looming shoulders tense. He didn't move at first, just stared. It was a long, cold stare. Then he stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Every movement calculated. "You're making everything harder for yourself," he murmured, his voice low and calm, in a way that chilled my blood. He tapped the camera again, his fingers clicking against the plastic dome. "Remember," he said, leaning closer, "we see everything." I closed my door the moment he walked away, locking it, even though Claire had told me locks were a sign of distrust. My lungs felt tight, but this time it wasn't only physical. I sat on my bed wrapped in blankets, gripping my phone. Fear still lived in my body, but something else did too, a pulse of determination that beat harder each time they underestimated me. I whispered into the darkness, into the cold air that no longer felt like it belonged to this house. "You don't know that I'm watching you back." And for the first night since I moved in, I didn't feel entirely helpless. I felt ready. Tomorrow, she won't see it coming. Claire's words from the night before clung to me like a cold sweat as I opened my eyes. The sky outside my window was still dark, the kind of early hour where even birds hesitate to break the silence. My lungs were already tight, as if they sensed something in the air before I did. I pushed myself upright, coughing softly until the fit receded. I dreaded leaving my room, but staying inside felt worse. The cold bit at my skin the second I opened the door. The camera blinked awake at my movement, its red light blinking like a pulse. Downstairs I heard murmured whispers and the clinking of dishes. Claire and Matt never woke this early. It was unusual enough to spike my heartbeat. The murmur stopped abruptly when my foot hit the bottom step. I entered the kitchen slowly. Claire stood beside the sink, her hair pulled back, her expression too still. Matt leaned against the fridge, arms crossed, cigarette already smoldering between his fingers. They both stared at me as though they had rehearsed this moment. "You look tired," Claire said brightly. "Too brightly. Maybe stay in your room today. Rest." Her tone wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. I just need my morning tea," I whispered, trying to steady my breathing. The air in the kitchen was heavy with smoke. Matt smirked and flicked ash into the sink. "You should really stop complaining so much. The drama gets old." I swallowed hard and reached for a mug. My hands shook not from weakness, but from the instinctive fear that traveled up my spine whenever he looked at me like that. When I turned toward the pantry to grab tea, the room seemed to shift. Matt stepped closer. Too close. I could smell the smoke on his clothes before I saw the cigarette in his fingers. He inhaled once, long, deliberate, then exhaled a stream of smoke in my direction. It hit me like a wave. My throat seized first, then the burning sank deep into my chest. I coughed, doubling over, slightly gripping the counter to steady myself. "Matt, please," I gasped. "You know I can't. You can't," what he said. "Handle a little smoke, that's your problem, not mine." I felt the world tilt. Claire watched from the doorway, arms crossed, face unreadable. "Matt," I managed, voice cracking between coughs. "Please don't." Smoke in my face. He stepped closer, invading the space between us, until the heat of his breath hit my cheek. "You don't get to tell me what to do in my house," he murmured. He took another drag and exhaled directly at me. My lungs convulsed instantly. Pain shot through my ribs. I grabbed the counter because my knees buckled. Each breath felt smaller than the last. My airway was narrowing too quickly, like a fist squeezing from the inside. "I can't breathe," I wheezed. Claire's lips curled slightly. Not a smile, something colder. "You're always making everything about you," she said. "Just calm down." I stumbled toward my inhaler on the table, but when I reached for it, my fingers hit empty air. It wasn't where I left it. I dropped to my knees, frantic, searching the floor. Each second burned. "My inhaler," I rasped. "Where is it?" Matt shrugged. Maybe you should keep better track of your stuff. My vision pulsed, my hearing buzzed. I crawled toward my room, remembering the nebulizer beside the bed, but when I tried to use it earlier, the tubing felt loose. Had someone touched it? Sabotaged it. My hands shook as I reached for the machine now. The tubing detached with a soft pop. The chamber was empty again. Dry. Useless. No, I gasped. Claire appeared behind me. You really should be more careful with your equipment. The world darkened around the edges. I felt myself sliding downward, knees hitting the floor. My breath came in thin, high-pitched gasps. My chest spasmed violently. Somewhere behind me, Matt sighed loudly. Maybe call 911, he said lazily. She's being dramatic again. I forced the words out. Phone, my phone. Claire looked at me with a tilt of her head like my suffering bored her. You don't need your phone. Just breathe. I can't, I wheezed. Claire stepped aside and walked away. Matt tossed something toward me. My inhaler. It clattered against the floor and slid under the dresser. My vision blurred. I crawled toward it, blind, desperate. My lungs screamed for air, but my body refused to comply. I couldn't get a full inhale. Each one was a tiny, strangled breath that made my ribs shake. Just as my fingers brushed the edge of the inhaler, I collapsed forward. Panic surged through me, sharp, cold total. Air. I needed air. I fumbled for my phone fingers, trembling violently. Somehow, through the fog in my head, I managed to swipe and hit 911. A thin whisper escaped me. Help! Can't breathe! The dispatcher's voice crackled. Stay with me. Help is coming. Can you tell me what happened? Smoke, can't breathe. COPD. My voice dissolved into a violent coughing fit. Claire shouted from the hallway. Hang up. You're making things worse. I clutched the phone tighter, pressing it to my ear. The dispatcher's voice steadied me. Don't hang up. Help is on the way. The front door burst open moments later. Paramedics rushed in, their voices sharp and urgent. She's cyanotic, get oxygen on her now. Check the airway. Move her carefully. Don't jostle her chest. Hands lifted me gently. A mask covered my face. Cold oxygen flooded my lungs, shocking them awake. I coughed hard, but air finally filled the spaces that had been starved. My vision sharpened slowly. One paramedic glanced at the inhaler lying half-hidden under the dresser. Why was this all the way under here? He asked. Matt replied instantly, she drops things. The paramedic didn't look convinced. Another paramedic lifted the nebulizer and frowned. It's empty, and the tubing isn't attached. Did she use this recently? Claire's voice rose. She panics. She's always doing things wrong. The paramedics exchanged glances, serious ones, cautious ones. They weren't buying the excuses. The police arrived next. This time they didn't treat it as a simple misunderstanding. One officer knelt beside me as I tried to breathe steadily through the oxygen mask. Ma'am, he asked gently, are you safe in this home? I shook my head weakly. No, I whispered. I'm not. Matt scoffed behind him. She's exaggerating, sir. The officer snapped, step back. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, Claire followed closely, demanding answers, insisting the paramedics were overreacting. You don't understand her condition, she said sharply. She gets overly dramatic, but the paramedic closest to me cut her off. She's in respiratory distress. This isn't drama. They wheeled me toward the ambulance, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the air begin to lighten, not because my lungs were healed, but because someone finally believed me. From the stretcher, I saw Claire's face shift from frustration to fear. Real fear. Matt's jaw tightened, his hands clenched at his sides. For the first time, I wasn't the only one gasping. As the doors closed, the paramedic leaned toward me. APS has been notified, he said softly. You're not going back there tonight. A single tear slid down my cheek, not from pain, but from something close to relief. As the ambulance pulled away, Claire's voice echoed faintly behind us. Anna, don't do this. You're ruining everything." But they had already ruined everything long before I dialed 911. Inside the ambulance, hooked to oxygen, listening to the hum of machinery keeping my lungs steady, I felt something shift deep inside me. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was the beginning of an ending I hadn't dared imagine. And for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt the air returning slowly, painfully, triumphantly. This was the moment everything changed. I woke to the hushed beeping of a hospital monitor, the soft hum of filtered air, and a stillness so foreign it made me uncomfortable. For the first time in months, I wasn't cold. I wasn't coughing. I wasn't listening for footsteps outside my door. The sheets were warm, the room quiet, and breathing didn't feel like lifting a boulder inside my chest. But the relief was fragile. Every breath reminded me I wasn't in my room anymore because I couldn't go back. And the thought of Claire or Matt walking through the hospital doors sent a chill down the center of my spine. A nurse stepped in with a kind smile. "Morning, Anna." "How's the breathing better?" I whispered. "I think." "You're safe here," she said gently, adjusting the oxygen tube resting under my nose. "APS has been notified. You won't be discharged back to that home." The words felt unreal, like oxygen for my mind, not just my lungs. I blinked back tears and nodded. Just as the nurse left, another woman entered, her posture straight, but her expression warm. She carried a folder and a tablet. Her badge read, "APS Investigator Linda Carver." "Good morning, Anna," she said softly as she took a seat beside my bed. "I'm here to help you." "Is this an okay time to talk?" I nodded slowly. My throat tightened, but this time the emotion wasn't fear. It was the strange weight of being believed. Linda opened her folder. "First, I want you to know this conversation is completely confidential. I'm going to ask you some difficult questions. But you're safe. No one can hurt you right now. Safe." The word landed in my chest like sunlight. She began gently, "Can you tell me what happened yesterday?" My voice shook as I spoke. He blew smoke directly at me. I asked him not to, and then I couldn't breathe. "Has this happened before? Smoke in the vents, sabotaged equipment, cold in my room, the rules, the slap." Her pen paused. "Slap," she repeated softly. "Yes," I whispered. "A few days ago. Matt hit me. Did you report it?" "I tried," I said. "But the police. Claire talked for me. They said there wasn't enough proof." Linda's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice stayed calm. "Tell me everything, even the small details." For the first time I did. The smoke, the cold upstairs. The camera pointed at my door. The locked pantry. The missing inhaler. The disassembled nebulizer. The rules. The invoices. The way Claire watched me like she was waiting for something. The feeling of being observed constantly, even in silence. When I finished, my lungs trembled, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of releasing months of held breath. Linda nodded slowly, compassion in her eyes. "Anna, this isn't just neglect. Some of what you described is consistent with intentional